In our daily existence, we find ourselves trapped within a framework of thinking that seems almost inescapable, a world where everything must be categorized into opposing camps. We live in a reality where choices appear stark and absolute: capitalism or socialism, liberal or conservative, rational or emotional, masculine or feminine. This binary lens, through which we view the world, feels natural, perhaps even necessary for making sense of our complex reality. Yet what if this very approach to understanding life is fundamentally limiting our potential for deeper wisdom and genuine comprehension? The renowned French philosopher Jacques Derrida dedicated his intellectual career to examining this precise question. Through his groundbreaking work, he challenged the Western philosophical tradition's obsession with binary oppositions and offered a radically different approach to understanding truth, meaning, and reality itself. His revolutionary thinking emerged not from abstract academic speculation, but from lived experience of how rigid ideological thinking can cause real harm in the world. Born in 1930 in French colonial Algeria, Derrida's early life was marked by the harsh realities of ideological extremism. As a member of a Sephardic Jewish family, young Jacques experienced firsthand how binary thinking, the stark division between us and them, could manifest in devastating ways. The anti-Semitic policies of the French colonial government meant that on his very first day of school, he was expelled from his lycée, simply because of his ethnic and religious background. This traumatic introduction to the consequences of rigid categorization would prove formative. Throughout his adolescence, Derrida continued to face discrimination and exclusion, experiences that undoubtedly shaped his later philosophical skepticism toward absolute truths and fixed categories. Rather than becoming bitter or cynical, however, these early encounters with injustice seemed to fuel his desire to understand how human thinking itself might contribute to such harmful divisions. During his teenage years, Derrida discovered philosophy through the works of thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Friedrich Nietzsche, Albert Camus, and Jean-Paul Sartre. In these philosophical texts, he found not just intellectual stimulation, but a means of resistance, a way to question and challenge the circumstances that had caused him so much suffering. Philosophy became his tool for rebellion against narrow-minded thinking, and his pathway toward a more nuanced understanding of human existence. In 1949, Derrida moved to Paris to pursue formal philosophical studies, eventually earning his master's degree in philosophy in 1954. What followed was a distinguished academic career that would span decades and continents. He held prestigious professorships, traveled extensively as a lecturer and researcher, authored more than 40 books, and received honorary doctorates from major universities around the world. Yet Derrida's intellectual journey was far from smooth. His ideas proved as controversial as they were influential. When Cambridge University awarded him an honorary degree in 1992, a group of prominent philosophers wrote a formal letter of protest to the university administration. They argued that Derrida's work failed to meet basic standards of philosophical clarity and rigor, dismissing his contributions as little more than incomprehensible attacks on the fundamental values of reason, truth, and scholarly inquiry. This criticism reflected a deeper tension within academic philosophy itself. Traditional philosophers valued precision, logical clarity, and systematic argumentation, qualities they felt were absent from Derrida's work. However, this critique may have missed the point entirely. Derrida was not attempting to destroy philosophy or reduce it to meaningless chaos. Instead, he was trying to reveal the limitations of traditional philosophical methods and offer a more sophisticated approach to understanding the complexities of human thought, language, and experience. The philosophical method that made Derrida famous and infamous was deconstruction. This approach represented a fundamental challenge to the Western philosophical tradition, particularly the influence of Platonic thinking that had dominated intellectual discourse for over 2 millennia. Plato had argued that beyond the world of appearances lay a realm of perfect, eternal forms, true essences that gave meaning and structure to everything we experience in the physical world. Derrida's deconstruction questioned this entire framework. Rather than seeking to discover eternal truths hidden behind appearances, deconstruction focused on revealing how all thinking inevitably relies on binary oppositions, and how these oppositions are never as stable or clear-cut as they initially appear. In every binary pair, One term typically gets privileged over the other: reason over emotion, speech over writing, presence over absence, truth over falsehood, and so on. The goal of deconstruction was not to simply reverse these hierarchies, to celebrate emotion over reason or falsehood over truth, but to reveal how each term in a binary opposition actually depends on its supposed opposite for its very meaning. This interdependence suggests that the sharp distinctions we draw between opposing concepts are far more fluid and unstable than we typically recognize. Consider the relationship between light and darkness. We cannot understand what light means without reference to darkness, and vice versa. Each concept gains its meaning precisely through its difference from and relationship to the other. Similarly, concepts like good and evil, male and female, or rational and irrational exist in a complex web of mutual dependence rather than standing as isolated, self-contained categories. Central to Derrida's critique was his analysis of how Western philosophy approaches language and truth. Traditional thinking assumes that language serves as a transparent tool for accessing and communicating absolute truths that exist independently of language itself. This approach, which Derrida termed logocentrism, treats language as a reliable bridge between human consciousness and objective reality. Derrida argued that this faith in language as a pathway to absolute truth was fundamentally misguided. Language, he suggested, is inherently unstable and context-dependent. The meaning of any word or concept is never fixed or final, but constantly shifts based on its relationships with other words and the specific contexts in which it appears. Every linguistic sign, whether spoken, written, or gestural, can be quoted, repeated, and transplanted into entirely new contexts. This ability to be cited means that no sign ever has a completely stable, unchanging meaning. Instead, meaning emerges through an endless play of differences and relationships between signs, contexts, and interpretations. As Derrida put it, every sign, linguistic or non-linguistic, spoken or written, can be cited, put between quotation marks. Thereby, it can break with every given context, and engender infinitely new contexts, in an absolutely non-saturable fashion. This insight suggests that rather than there being one central, absolute truth waiting to be discovered, we exist within contexts without any center of absolute anchoring. For most people raised in Western cultures, this instability of meaning and absence of absolute certainty feels deeply uncomfortable. We tend to prefer clear answers, definitive solutions, and unambiguous truths. The idea that meaning is always shifting, and that certainty may be impossible to achieve, can feel like a recipe for intellectual chaos or moral relativism. Derrida, however, viewed this condition of uncertainty not as a philosophical failure, but as an opportunity for greater wisdom and intellectual honesty. He used the Greek term aporia, meaning impasse, or deadlock, to describe the state of productive confusion that results from serious philosophical inquiry. Aporia represents those moments when we realize that we cannot easily resolve complex questions or reduce complicated issues to simple either-or choices. Rather than being a sign that we have made an error in our thinking, aporia indicates that we have arrived at a more accurate understanding of our actual situation as finite beings attempting to comprehend an infinitely complex reality. Think of aporia as the intellectual equivalent of being lost in a vast, mysterious forest. Rather than pretending we know exactly where we are and confidently marching in one direction, aporia encourages us to acknowledge our disorientation honestly. This acknowledgement, paradoxically, becomes the beginning of genuine wisdom. By admitting what we do not know, we open ourselves to learning and discovery in ways that false certainty prevents. Derrida's approach to philosophy suggests that genuine intellectual maturity requires a kind of modesty that our culture often discourages. Instead of rushing to take strong positions on complex issues, we might benefit from spending more time exploring the tensions, contradictions, and nuances that make these issues genuinely difficult to resolve. This does not mean abandoning all beliefs or convictions. Rather, it means holding our beliefs more lightly, recognizing that even our most cherished ideas are necessarily partial, contextual, and open to revision. It means being curious about perspectives that challenge or complicate our own views, rather than immediately dismissing them as wrong or irrelevant. Consider how this approach might apply to contemporary political debates. Instead of viewing political disagreements as battles between absolute good and absolute evil, we might recognize that different political perspectives often arise from genuinely different values, experiences, and priorities. A conservative emphasis on tradition and stability, and a progressive focus on equality and change, both reflect important human concerns. The tension between these perspectives may be more valuable than the triumph of either one alone. Similarly, in debates about emotion versus reason, we might recognize that both emotional intelligence and rational analysis contribute essential elements to human understanding. Rather than privileging one over the other, we might explore how they can work together in productive tension. Derrida's philosophy suggests that wisdom often emerges not from choosing one side of a binary opposition, but from learning to inhabit the space between opposites, the space of tension, ambiguity, and ongoing dialogue. This space can feel uncomfortable because it requires us to tolerate uncertainty and complexity rather than seeking simple solutions. Yet, this discomfort may be precisely what genuine thinking requires. Easy answers and clear-cut solutions often appeal to us because they reduce anxiety and provide a sense of control. However, they may also prevent us from grappling seriously with the actual complexity of human existence. Living in the space between opposites means developing what we might call negative capability, the ability to remain in uncertainty and doubt, rather than irritably reaching after fact and reason. It means being willing to say, "I don't know," or "it's complicated," when those responses are more honest than false certainty. Derrida often described his philosophical approach as more democratic than traditional Western thinking. This democratic quality emerges from deconstruction's tendency to question hierarchies and give voice to marginalized perspectives. Instead of assuming that some ideas are inherently superior to others, deconstruction explores how supposedly inferior concepts might contain insights that have been overlooked or suppressed. In political terms, this approach suggests being suspicious of any ideology that claims to have all the answers or dismisses opposing viewpoints as entirely without merit. It encourages us to listen seriously to voices that have been marginalized or excluded from dominant conversations. It reminds us that truth-telling often emerges from the margins rather than from centers of established power. This democratic approach does not mean that all perspectives are equally valid or that we cannot make meaningful distinctions between better and worse ideas. Rather, it means approaching these judgments with greater humility and remaining open to the possibility that our current understanding is incomplete or one-sided. How might Derrida's insights apply to everyday life? Consider how we approach personal relationships. Instead of viewing conflicts with partners, friends, or family members as battles to be won, we might approach them as opportunities to explore different perspectives and find creative solutions that honor multiple viewpoints. In professional contexts, rather than immediately dismissing ideas that seem to contradict our current approaches, we might explore what insights they might contain. Innovation often emerges from the creative combination of seemingly opposing perspectives, rather than from the straightforward application of established principles. Even in our relationship with ourselves, Derrida's approach might encourage greater self-acceptance. Instead of viewing our contradictions and inconsistencies as flaws to be eliminated, we might recognize them as natural aspects of human complexity. The goal becomes not achieving perfect internal consistency, but learning to navigate our multiple sides with wisdom and compassion. Decades after Derrida's major works were published, his insights remain remarkably relevant to contemporary challenges. In an era of increasing polarization, his critique of binary thinking offers valuable tools for bridging divides and finding common ground. In a time of information overload and competing narratives, his analysis of language and meaning provides frameworks for navigating complexity without falling into relativism. Perhaps most importantly, Derrida's emphasis on intellectual humility offers an antidote to the arrogance and certainty that characterize much contemporary discourse. His work reminds us that the most important questions about justice, meaning, identity, and truth are too complex to be resolved through simple formulas or partisan talking points. Jacques Derrida's philosophical legacy challenges us to develop what we might call the courage to dwell in questions rather than rushing toward answers. This courage requires us to resist the comfortable certainties that binary thinking provides and instead, learn to navigate the uncertain terrain between established positions. This is not a call for indecision or paralysis. Rather, it is an invitation to a more sophisticated form of thinking, one that can hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, recognize the partial nature of all human understanding, and remain open to ongoing learning and revision. In a world that increasingly demands that we choose sides and defend our positions with unwavering certainty, Derrida's philosophy offers a different path. It suggests that wisdom may lie not in the strength of our convictions, but in the quality of our questions, the depth of our listening, and our willingness to be transformed by genuine encounter with difference. The forest of ideas and meanings in which we find ourselves may indeed be infinite and disorienting. But rather than seeing this as a problem to be solved, we might learn to see it as the very condition that makes growth, discovery, and authentic dialogue possible. In embracing the complexity and uncertainty that binary thinking tries to eliminate, we may paradoxically find our way toward a more honest and ultimately more satisfying relationship with truth itself. This video presentation explores these themes through the lens of philosophical education, reminding us that understanding complex thinkers like Derrida requires patience, openness, and willingness to grapple with difficult ideas. The journey toward wisdom is rarely straightforward, but it is precisely in the wandering that we often discover the most valuable insights about ourselves and our world.